Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dennis Myers, Assistant Executive Director for Governmental Relations with California School Boards Association. Welcome to our May budget revision overview. Today, the governor introduced his May revision, which kind of really sets the tone for the next month in budget negotiations in the Capitol. So we wanted to make sure that you had the information necessary as you start closing out, the adoption process for your budget for current year adjustments and next year. We have some housekeeping issues that we want to just make sure you're aware of. These, if you've been to our webinars, these are what we go through every time. We will have a Q&A session at the end. Please, when you do submit questions, submit those in the Q&A feature. You'll see there, it's at the bottom of your screen. If you just move your cursor, you'll see the Q&A next to chat. Please don't put it in chat. Please use it in Q&A. And then at the end, all of the attendees will receive a link to this presentation and a copy of the slide deck as well. Next slide. As I introduced myself, I'm Dennis Myers. You'll see also on the screen with me is Chris Reef. He is CSBA's Legislative Director. And then our moderator is Troy Flint, but he is actually having technical difficulties. So when he joins us, you'll hear him start chiming in. But right now, he is just somebody out there who's trying to get into the session here. So let's just go ahead and start right now with an overview, kind of a big picture overview of the Prop 98 guarantee and state general funds. Next slide, please. When the governor talked about the May revision, obviously he starts talking big picture, and the big part of the picture is where is the projected state deficit. So if you recall, when we talked about this in January, the projected deficit was $22.5 billion. As you've heard news over the last 4, 5, 6 months, you think that things have I'm not going to say steadily gotten worse, but they have not gotten any better. So what the governor has said is that since January through now, the projected deficit is $31.5 billion. What that represents, and you just remember when we talk about this in January, but also in the May revision, the state is looking at a 3-year. They're looking at 3 years. They're looking back a year and adjusting that year as they've closed it out. They're looking at the current year and looking at how revenues are coming in based on the budget that was adopted. And then they're projecting that into the next fiscal year, or what we call the budget year. So over that 3-year period, we're looking at a deficit now of $31.5 billion, and that's state general fund. What the governor also outlined is there are things that are just kind of causing some uncertainty, and I'm sure they're causing a great deal amount of heartburn for the governor, the Department of Finance, and for legislative leaders, and for those of us at CSBA who are watching the budget. Things that are kind of unknown. You've heard about the federal debt ceiling impasse. Janet Yellen with the Treasury Secretary has talked about this, the June 1 deadline for Congress to pass debt ceiling increase. The reason why that's on here, and the governor says, that if federal government is allowed to default on some of its debt, there could be some implications on the markets that would drive our revenues here in the state a little lower as well. Also, many of you have heard there was a federal delay in the tax filing deadline to October 15th. The state changed its rules to conform with that. And so without knowing, a major portion of state personal income tax was not filed on April 15th. Those are trickling in under this new deadline. And so the state is not going to know how strong personal income tax and corporate tax filings are until fall. And so that also has implications on where the budget could be heading. And then there are also just the economic factors of, hey, where are interest rates going? Everybody's talking about this potential recession looming out there. Looking at California's economy, job growth is strong. It's just not as strong as it has been in the past, but there are still more jobs being created. Consumer spending is up, personal sales tax revenues are up. So things are looking, fairly positive, but then there are the factors of, as we just said here, of these 4 bullets, but also, where inflation might go, and just some, things that may cause, the economy to start shrinking. But right now it's growing slightly year to year and even on a monthly basis. Next slide, please. Now, going from what the state budget looks like and the implications of Prop 98, what the May revision is talking about is that we're still in test one. Test one is a specific percentage of state general fund revenues. And from January to now, the state, our share of Prop 98 has gone up a bit. And this is just kind of general information for you as you're looking at your budgets. You're not going to be thinking about, hey, is Proposition 98 38.3 or 38.5% of the budget, but it's just good to know for you that state general fund revenue goes up, goes down. Prop 98 goes up or down because we're in test one. So that's just something to park in your mind as you look at news from us and other organizations over the next few months. Because of the decrease in overall state general fund revenues, remember I referenced that $31.5 billion problem at the state general fund. The Prop 98 guarantee has itself gone down too. Now, when we talk about this decrease, again, that's over a 3-year period. So as they closed out the prior year, I think Prop 98 just went up by $100 or $200 million. But when you get into the current year, there's a current year dip in Prop 98, and then that translates into a dip into the next fiscal year. And so that's why these numbers are here showing that there is a pretty decent sized decrease in the Proposition 98 guarantee. And so you can see there in the third bullet how the guarantee is looking over the 3-year projection period. And so you can see going from 110.6 billion in the prior year budget to 106.8 current year. So you can see that reduction, and then that reduction then maintains into the budget year at 106.8 billion. And again, that's the Prop 98 guarantee. That's the whole guarantee, K through 14. The 3-year total decrease, as you add these up, is about 3.8, almost $4 billion. So again, these are a substantial decline that the governor's May revision is making adjustments for. On the next slide here, then we'll talk about cost of living or our COLA. We were talking in January when the governor introduced a January budget of an 8.13% COLA. The formula has actually now, the way it is, it's in arrears about 3 fiscal quarters. So, calendar quarters. And so inflation, according to that formula, has gone up for our COLA from 8.13 to 8.22%. So that, the biggest part of the increased expenditures in the Prop 98, obviously, is that 8.22% COLA in LCFF. And then we just need you to know too that 8.22% COLA also applies to county offices of education. And then all of the categorical programs that get what's called statutory COLA, because that's what this is. This is the COLA called for by statute. All of those programs, including special education, also will get this 8.22% COLA. Next slide, please. We always include a discussion about the public school system stabilization account. This is what we call the Prop 98 reserve. In January, the January budget showed that reserve amount was actually going down. But because of the increase in the percentage of the state budget that is coming from capital gains income, between January and now, it's actually kind of reversed the trend, and there's now a call for more money to be automatically deposited into the Prop 98 reserve. So in January, the reserve was going to go down to 8.5, but between January and now, the automatic formula is now calling for that to go up to $10.7 billion. So not only is the COLA increasing demand on Prop 98, this is also the other big demand on Prop 98 as well, because this actually does get scored against the guarantee. So what this means then is now, all right, so we're talking about, this amount being contributed into the Prop 98 reserve. The school district reserve cap now correlates to all of this information. And so, yes, as we've been saying over the last few years, because we're in a test 1 year, the state doesn't owe you all any money under the guarantee, under past payments that are overdue. So the reserve cap is triggered in this next fiscal year. So just looking at these bullets here, we've been talking about this for a while. Basically, what it says, you have to spend down your reserves to 10%. It applies only to what's known as assigned and unassigned funds. So if you put these funds away in committed funds, or assigned our funds where the board actually adopts the reserve designations. It doesn't apply there. So just make sure you're working together, your business offices, the governance team is working to make sure that you're not forced to spend down your reserves. And then lastly, just because of the way that we got the law written, is it does not apply to any small districts, 2,500 and below, and it does not apply to basic aid districts as well. Next, we're going to go into a description of some of the programmatic parts of the governor's budget. And for that, Chris Reef will cover these slides.
Thanks, Dennis. So I like to start off a little bit of good news, recognizing that the budget didn't have, a lot, the May revision didn't have a lot of great news. And the big win here is that the May revision included $80 million in ongoing Prop 98 money to help increase funding for county offices of education. So as many of you know, and for many of our county board members who are on the webinar, the county offices of education operate and provide educational programs for students who are in our juvenile court schools and those that are in our county community schools, right? And a lot of these students are some of our highest needs students. And this has been a priority for CSBA the entire year through AB 906, which was our co-sponsored bill with the California County Superintendents, as well as the Los Angeles County Office of Education. We're very pleased to see that the governor included these dollars, ongoing dollars, to help provide more stability of funding for County Office of Education, recognizing that as the state begins to realign, if you will, our State Department of Juvenile Justice to a county-based program, a lot of these students who are in our statewide system are going to be transitioning into our county-based systems, our jails, county jails. And so that's going to put a lot of increased pressure on our County Office of Education to serve these children. And so this $80 million was very much welcome. We also saw an additional increase of about 50% to further help and assist counties in funding the differentiated assistance. These are the technical assistance support programs that county offices provide to member school districts and counties. So these were some welcome additions and welcome wins for our county offices of education. Next slide. So on the however aspect of this, and I know Dennis, I'm going to ask Dennis kind of jump in and help me out a little bit on this one. And Dennis talked a lot about the COLA and how we saw an increase in the COLA from 8.13 to 8.22%. And then he also talked about the reserve. Here we see how the governor gets at funding both the increase of the COLA as well as the reserve. And so back in January, we saw a proposal from the governor to reduce the arts, music, and instructional materials block grant by about $1.2 billion. Here we're seeing he's adding an additional cut of $607 million. That brings the overall reduction to the grant to $1.8 billion. That will be equal to about 50%, or actually a little bit more than half of the actual arts discretionary block grant. Now, in addition to that, right, to be able to fund the COLA and the reserve, we also see, and we're a little bit surprised to see the governor dip into learning recovery emergency block grant as well. So there's a $2.5 billion decrease, of about a little bit less than 1/3, 30% reduction in that. And again, these are funds that are being taken, one-time monies, to be able to fund what are essentially kind of some ongoing costs, most likely are mostly seen in the COLA.
Chris, since you opened it up, I'll talk, but we just before this started got off of a call with the Department of Finance to just kind of learn more about the details here. The reason why, and we're not saying this is good or not, because we're concerned about these. There are other one-time funds we think that they could zero in on, but as Prop 98 comes down, the way the state is looking at is how can we have that reduction come down, what can be reduced without impacting ongoing base programs. And so that's why they're looking at one-time money while protecting everything ongoing. So that's why LCFF, yes, the COLA, there was a question I think in the Q&A, is the COLA going to be fully funded? Yes, right now fully funding the COLA. Homeschool transportation, special ed, all those things that you consider as ongoing base, that's why these reductions are being made. We were talking with Department of Finances, wow, don't you realize, this is a 50% reduction in the arts and music, arts instruction materials block grant, when state looks at this, and again, we have some conversation to have over the next month, is they're saying, well, you know what, the way the law is written right now, LEAs are required to have their plan in place, and the expenditures are over the next couple of years. So from the state's perspective, you all haven't spent this yet, so it's easier to claw this back. Obviously, we have some conversations to have with them, because we know you have a lot of designs for this, and we have to look at perhaps some other one-time money to steer away, so that we can protect the base program. So that's why we look at this and we go, yeah, we know why you're doing it, but is there a different way to do this to protect ongoing programs?
Let's go the other way if we could. Next slide. One more time. So one of the biggest proposals that we saw in the January budget was the LCFF equity multiplier. And many of you who are part of our or registered for our January budget webinar will have noticed this, is that this was actually in response to some discussions that the governor was having with members of the Legislative Black Caucus, specifically Assemblymember Akila Weber from San Diego. And it was in regards to her bill, AB 2774. And so in response to that bill, in last year, which was a bill that would have addressed some of the lower performing subgroups and allocated additional dollars, in response to the governor, that bill was kind of shelved. And then we saw the governor enter into negotiations, and we saw the product of those negotiations is this equity multiplier. So what it is $300 million add-on on top of LCFF that will go out based upon free meal qualification or eligibility to support some of our highest needs students. So you can see here at elementary school level, 90% of your free meal. Those that are where your elementary schools have a 90% eligibility rate for free meals, then they would receive those dollars, and for high school be 85%. And there's additional amendments to kind of address some of the outcomes of those dollars. We didn't see any changes in that regard. I don't think we expected really any changes, but we felt it was really necessary to add a slide here because the multiplier has been an item of discussion in the budget throughout these last 4 or 5 months, especially as it relates to some of the efforts to really address some of the more racial achievement gap that exists, right? And especially for some of our lower performing subgroups of students. Next slide. So UTK, Universal Transitional Kindergarten. This continues to be one of the largest programmatic expansions in education that we've seen in a generation. And one of the biggest pieces here that I like to take away from the May revision is that the governor continues to commit to rebenching Proposition 98 to reflect the enrollment growth and the expansion of the program. This is significant because we want to make sure that as Prop 98 or as enrollment grows, because TK expands, we want to make sure Prop 98 grows with it. Otherwise, we'll be spreading the butter over a smaller piece of butter over a bigger piece of bread, if you will. And so what you see here is there's a little bit of adjustments. These aren't big kind of funding changes, but these are more adjustments based upon some enrollment projections that we see as it relates to the UTK implementation. And so you kind of see these reductions based upon what the actual numbers are looking like in the number of students that are enrolling in transitional kindergarten. And so one of the other bigger takeaways I wanted to make sure I point out here was that this last bullet in the budget language that was adopted in the current year budget, there's language that says it's the intent of the legislature to lower the TK teacher to student ratio from 1 to 12 to 10, but it makes it contingent upon a budget appropriation. What we saw in the January budget and now what we see in the May revise is that the Department of Finance has clarified and made sure that folks are aware that the 1 to 12 ratio remains, so that there is no specific funding that is being proposed to trigger the lower 1 to 10 ratio. That's a big takeaway. That's a major area of concern for CSBA, where we have advocated for not lowering the ratio as of yet because of the implementation challenges that many of you are all experiencing, right? From facility capacity to the staffing shortages to just other logistical challenges on how we're trying to implement one of the largest educational programs to date. Next slide. Special education, this is always a big one. We wanted to make sure we put a slide in here. When it comes to the May revision, if the governor kind of doesn't talk about it, kind of means that, things remain the same from what he proposed in the January budget. But because special education continues to be a real challenge, both from a funding perspective, but also in terms of meeting community needs, we want to make sure we saw that we provided, again, a slide that shows that there was not a lot of changes. What we did see, though, in the governor's January budget is a continued investment in special education. We saw additional dollars there, and now we see the COLA being applied, which of course is very welcome. Just providing these extra few bullets here. These were changes that were made and proposed in the governor's January budget. So this is just a kind of a reassurance slide to make sure everyone knows that we're not seeing any significant changes, especially given some of a lot of the reform talk. There's always kind of this talk about, should the money go through the CELPAs, should money go through the districts? We haven't really seen a lot of change in that regard. So just would like to provide this to provide a little bit of more of assurance on the special ed side. Next slide. So this is actually a big investment that we're seeing, and this is something where it reflects what is the priority of the governor. And many of you might be aware that there is a bill out there, SB 691, to require dyslexia screenings. And this is a welcome addition because the funding is really a big challenge here. And this is an intention here is to provide and require districts to conduct dyslexia screenings for all students. And so you see there's additional dollars here for to support the convening of a panel of experts to be able to provide districts with a list of instruments, if you will, or best practices in some respects and assessments to be able to do these dyslexia screenings. There's also language in the May revision that expresses the intent of the governor to be able to fund professional development. This is an area of concern for us, recognizing that this is a new requirement and want to make sure that if it's done right. And so we're going to continue to see these negotiations both in the budget and in SB 691, to which will be heavily invested. Next slide. Universal school meals. This is probably one of the biggest successes we've seen in terms of uptake and enrollment in the programs. I know there's still we continue to see challenges in terms of funding and costs and so forth, but we've seen a great demand and a great reception of the program. The governor recognizes this, and you see that in addition to the $1.5 billion that he proposed to provide greater supports for providing 2 free school meals per day, he's adding an additional $110 million in one-time Prop 98, and then another $191 million in ongoing general fund to fully fund the program for the next 2 fiscal years. Or I should say current year fiscal year and then the coming fiscal year. Next slide. One area where we saw quite a bit of an investment during the middle of the pandemic was in recruitment and retention programs to produce more teaching candidates and to keep more teachers in the profession. There's about $5 billion that was put into the 21-22 budget over a period of 5 years. We saw a continuation of that, and so a lot of that money still exists. Here we see some modest adjustments to those programs to address issues of teacher residency programs, providing greater opportunity and greater length of time to be able to meet those requirements, addressing some of the challenges that teachers faced or teaching candidates faced in meeting their requirements because of the pandemic, also allowing the CTC some additional authority to be able to have a more flexibility in how they award credentials, especially for how they're going to be reviewing transcripts and how transcripts can be seen as a means of meeting or demonstrating competence. And then we have this issue of U.S. military service members. We're seeing a number of folks who are coming into the state by assignment of the U.S. military. Many of them have teaching credentials from other states. This is an effort to really help streamline that process. And again, another modest way of helping to address our teaching and staffing shortages across the state. Next slide. So this was actually really short. We didn't see, this was kind of a budget that's kind of holding the pattern. I'll turn it back over to Dennis on some of the, I know we've got a lot of questions here, so we can kind of help answer those, and he can kind of give a little bit more of some closing comments on what we saw in the May revision.
Sure. Thank you, Chris. I've just been tracking the questions here and I was, tempted to type the answers, but I think these are really important for everybody to understand. So the proposed cuts to the arts, music, instruction materials grant, as well as the learning recovery grant are current year reductions. How that would happen is even though you've already received those funds, I think if they haven't gone out, I think that last apportionment is going out this month. The legislature hasn't acted to reduce that. So either the Department of Education kind of slow walks it so that, you don't get that last apportionment, or if it is already going out, then there will be a reduction and in another apportionment that you would be receiving from the state. Meaning, if you already received these two grant monies for the full year allocation, and then there's this reduction, and then let's say your July, August apportionment comes for LCFF or something, that they would reduce it by a like amount. So that's how it would work for from the accounting perspective. And we call that clawing back. All right. So it's not like it's something that's easy. I don't want you to think that we're excited about this. We understand why and what's being protected, but they would claw it back through a future apportionment. I hope that makes sense. The discussion here, there's another question here about extended learning opportunity grant. There's no change from the January budget. That is intended to be ongoing. That's the governor's program. And so there's nothing new proposed there. And Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, in our discussions or anything the governor said today or in the pages that we got, I don't see any changes to that past governor's budget. Am I right there?
Yeah, and ELOP is one of the biggest, is also another big, large programmatic increase, and it is a large commitment of ongoing Prop 98 dollars, $4 billion ongoing. We didn't see any additional dollars, so you're exactly right in that regard. There is a little bit of additional flexibility provided or proposed in the May revision. This is in regards to a little bit more flexibility on how you offer the intersession or how you meet the 30 non-school day requirement. That makes it a little more optional. And then it extends the opportunity to meet the expenditure deadlines by an additional fiscal year. So what we're seeing, and this is kind of continuing with what we saw in past budgets, is that recognizing that a program of this scope and size is receiving additional flexibility and a little more of a off-ramp, if you will, to be able to meet its requirements.
Sure. Good. So we had a couple questions about what's the actual cut of these programs. The question I got here is what's the actual cut for the learning recovery? So instead of giving you the dollar amount, we're giving you percentages, because if I tell you, hey, the arts and music instruction material grant is going down by 1.8 billion, that means nothing to you. So the arts and music instruction material block grant, a 50% cut is being proposed. And on the learning recovery grant, it's a 30% reduction. Okay, so just for your factoring, just figure out what that means then for your LEA. Now, a couple questions here are related to Proposition 28. So Proposition 28 was the ballot measure that just passed last November that adds a small tax on high income earners, and it dedicates, actually it doesn't, there's no tax, it increases the amount of money from the state general fund that's dedicated to arts. So let's not confuse the reduction in the arts and music instruction materials. That's within Prop 98. And so that's what's being done to fully fund the base programs and COLA. But the governor is following what we see as the intent of Prop 28. So there's Proposition 98 guarantee. On top of that is about $1 billion on top of the guarantee. So it kind of carves out almost $1 billion of state general fund that goes then now for the intent of Proposition 28, and that is money to school sites for arts programs. Now, let's see, one of the questions here. So it's not tied to, it just has the same arts in the title, right? So there's Prop 28, which is arts funding, and then we're seeing a reduction in the block grant. And then we've also seen, if you look at what is in print now, it looks like there's a reduction in that Prop 28 money. you're going to see references to reductions in the amount of money being spent on categorical programs. You're going to see a reference in reductions being made to like LCFF. And here's what they're talking about. Anything that's tied to enrollment or average daily attendance, enrollments in K-12 education are going down. So let's say LCFF funding is going up by, $3.5 billion. They're scoring that because of the 8.22% COLA going up. Enrollments are down about 3%. So there's a net gain there of like 5%. And I'm talking generally. And those kind of things are referenced. If you look at what is in print about K-12 education, you'll see some of these reductions. So COLA, yes, fully funded. But then you look at, okay, if this is an average daily attendance or enrollment-based program, then there is a reduction K-12 by grade level of all these other programs. I hope that's clear. If not, just go ahead and keep asking questions. So you will see some of these references there. So programs aren't really being reduced. There's just adjustments being made because there are fewer students coming into the system. Chris, anything you want to add while I'm looking at other programs?
One of the questions that I see here in regards to the Prop 28 is the supplement versus the supplant requirement. This was actually something that came up in discussions with the Department of Finance. They're not proposing anything at the moment in regards to the May revise. I think we're going to see some. This is an area of concern for us. CSBA has actually advocated for greater clarity on this particular area. And so these are discussions ongoing. No hard answer right now, but this the supplant versus supplement requirement is definitely something that's going to be drawing the attention of the legislature and of the governor and us as we walk through the discussions and negotiations on the budget.
Sure. We also have a question here about the equity multiplier and whether, the way that schools qualify for this is based on free and reduced price meals. And we know that there are problems now, there's federal definitions, there's problems with collecting that data. The governor isn't proposing any change to that method. So the Department of he said this earlier, but the Department of Finance said very clearly in our meeting with them is the governor is committed to the equity multiplier. Now, what we intend to think is that what that means is there's going to be some sort of a discussion is this the best way to allocate the money? Is it going to get to the right schools with the right students that are being targeted here? There are several changes being made to some of the LCAP language. All of that will be negotiated over the next 30 days. So is there something better to identify? There may be, but right now, Department of Finance is saying, hey, that's our proposal. We're sticking with it. But for us, I think everybody here, let's just stay tuned to see how that transpires. Let's see, scrolling down even more. Again, ELOP is referenced in here and no changes to Extended Learning Opportunities Program. And I'm glad you mentioned the supplanting because that is something that we know is top of mind for you because, you did get a nice COLA and you got a nice increase to LCFF. You had money coming to you in this block grant and now you have the supplanting issue. So that will be something that we will be needing to hammer out. It was interesting when Department of Finance stayed away from that today to say, no, we don't have any proposal on that, meaning it's a part of negotiations over the next 30 days.
And I see a question here regarding the dyslexia screening. So what we saw in the May revision proposal was the $1 million to provide kind of a repository of tools, right, and assessments that districts can use. What we didn't necessarily see was a specific proposal to address the district level costs that come with that. That's going to continue to be an area of concern and advocacy for CSBA. So we anticipate that to be a continued component of conversation around SB 691, the bill that comes with that, because that bill is the legislation that will presumably implement or require put in place the requirement.
Sure.
And we'll have an email. I know some folks are having some questions on ELOP. We didn't see some more substantive changes to ELOP in the May revision. It's kind of more stay the course. There's a little bit more flexibility, though. I will say more modest flexibility, especially in regards to how districts and whether districts can have a little more flexibility, meaning the intercession, or i.e. the 30-day summer school requirement. That is, we have an email that will be coming out later tonight that has a larger summary of the May revision in greater detail. So please look out for that. But in essence, we didn't see real significant changes or proposals relating to ELOP in the May revision.
There's a question there about community funded districts and how some of this money will be taken back from them. It wasn't part of the discussion today with Department of Finance. We do expect to see language, I think they said later today. And so that would be in there, but I'm assuming if it is a 30% reduction to the program, that you would see a 30% reduction in your allocation as well. So I'm just not sure how you as a community funded district receive those funds. Let's see here. I'm just laughing at the last joke here. Thanks for working after hours to get this input to us. We spend a lot of time trying to figure this out for you and how we need to respond on your behalf as well. Let's see.
We're getting a lot of specific questions in terms of amounts and different things. So one thing that comes into play, and I just like to kind of circle back to what Dennis had said in terms of where things will sit because of delayed tax filings and so forth. What has come to be kind of the norm in the legislature is that what we will probably see is a framework of a budget adopted by the legislature. So there'll be a kind of a major budget bill, if you will, to be able to meet the June 15th deadline for the legislature to adopt a budget. And then we'll see, of course, a number of trailer bills. We'll see a number of subject-oriented trailer bills. We'll probably see close to 2 or 3 for public education alone, where we'll see a lot of these things reconcile as we get closer to the end of the legislative session in August and September. And so those kind of details we will see when we see the trailer bill come out from the governor's office, and also in terms of what the legislature finally adopts later this fall. I do see a question here about COLA and how it's consumed by the PERS increase. We did have an email blast that went out a couple of weeks ago regarding CalPERS and CalSTRS, which had both boards had met. CalSTRS rates had generally stayed the same. We saw a fairly significant increase in the CalPERS requirement. CalSTRS pressures continue. CalSTRS and CalPERS pressures continue to be a major area of concern for us. We have long advocated for dollars to be allocated to schools to help cover the local obligation costs outside of Prop 98. Right, these are what we see as unfunded state mandates in some respects, because these aren't things that you guys negotiate. These are things that we see adopted and handed down by the state. We were thankful the governor included it in the first 2 years of his time as governor, but we haven't seen it since. And so that continues to be an area of concern, because you're exactly right. As CalSTRS and CalPERS local contribution rates increase over time, that does eat into the COLA.
And one thing, if any of you were either listening to the governor's presentation, which started at 10 a.m. today, or maybe you might hear news clips or read something about it, he's taking a lot of credit for several $billion payment towards, and he'll say this, towards pension obligations, towards the CalPERS unfunded liability. You need to understand that's not your liability as a school employer. That's the state's liability, because they are an employer as well. So, as Chris said, there's nothing for schools specifically targeting employer contributions in this budget, nor in the last budget. Everything that they're talking about is for the state, and as they're being an employer too. So just so that you know that. So yeah, that is a cost that you're going to have filtering into your system. I think the CalPERS bump was like 1.5 or 2 percentage points, and then CalSTRS was held flat this year. I think we've covered everything. Chris, is there any last comments? Let's see.
I'm just scrolling through here. I think we got to most of them. A lot of Prop 28 questions. So appreciate all those. Hopefully we'll be able to address most of those.
And the next slide, I think it's the next slide, Chris, that just reminds folks that we are co-sponsoring the
Yes.
budget. All right. Now here's us. And so there's the legislative team right now with all of our email addresses. And these are on the website as well. We'll let you kind of look at that to maybe take a photo of it if you want to email us directly. And then the next slide is that just a reminder that we will have over the next 2 weeks, we're going out with Capital Advisors. We co-sponsor the budget perspective workshops. There's 28 locations, and I think there's 2 that are virtual, and our team will be out there with Capital Advisors talking about this in greater detail. So our level was pretty good. When Capital Advisors and we hit the road, that'll be with another week of studying, and we'll see the trailable language. So there'll be a little bit more detail in those. They're free. Sign up. If you can't make one, look on the website because there's 2 virtual ones that you could attend. You don't need to be a resident of the 2 counties that are virtual, and that way you'll get a lot more detail as well. A little more digesting happening with when we hit the road. So I think with that, we will close out here. Just a reminder, everybody who signed up will get a link to a recording and a copy of the slides. I think one of the questions was how soon will that happen? And since I'm in government relations and not in communications, I'm going to say a big fat, I don't know. It usually takes a couple of days, I think, for this to get out to you. But we will get it out to you as soon as we can. 48 hours. Thank you very much. So from Andy or Larry there in our communications, he just texted me, it'll be 48 hours that you will see this in your inboxes. And again, you can ask us any questions once you get this. With that, thank you for joining us for part of your Friday evening, and we hope you have an awesome weekend. I know here in Sacramento, we're going to have a very warm weekend. And so maybe we will see you out on the bike trail or something. Thank you for attending. Take care.
Take care, everybody.